Since the announcement that the federal government was revisiting the Orosanye report, labor has been up in arms. Why is labor up in arms? Labor says there will be job losses. And as labor leaders, you know that one of their mandates is to protect jobs, protect workers. Well, as that controversy rages, we have with us Comrade Fidelis Edeh, who was a former president of the Nigeria Civil Service Unions and at present executive director Service Accord Initiative. And it's also interesting to say that Comrade Edeh is a farmer.
Thank you.
And I want to start from farming before we talk about the main reason why we're here. Everything seems to be so difficult at this time. And farmers, like every other Nigerian, are complaining. What are the issues?
I think the issues seem to be self-fulfilled prophecy. You know, the first basic requirement for life is food. Apart from the fact that air is naturally given to humanity. When it comes to food security, it's as if the government seems not to have appreciated what it ought to do. And when I say government, I mean the 3 tiers. I mean the local government, the state, and the federal. Any nation that wants the well-being of its people will have to deal with food from the point of availability. Availability also means that people must have access to it, which means they must have purchasing power. The aspect of the well-being has to do that if you prescribe for the farmers what the country ought to eat to maintain nutrition, you also eventually spend less on Medicare. But agriculture seems to be what government mouth about, but don't actually develop policies and encourage enablers that allow the practicing farmers. Coupled with this is that if you look down past 5 years, the issue of headers seems to have been politicized to the point that it's like we have to live with it, but the consequences of living with it are just politics. It's part of what we are seeing. Because before now, dominantly you have farmers in Nigeria in the rural areas. Yes, subsistence farming, but they farm to keep their families intact, provide for themselves. When they can no longer do that, it means that you're also encouraging them to approach the open markets where they ought to before now bring in their products. So they
become buyers too.
Buyers too. So that is one. Then if you also look at the role of the local government in the 4th schedule of the Constitution, which is dominantly about agriculture. In fact, in agriculture, the role of the federal government ought to be policy and research. Then the state government ought to provide the enablers, particularly the issue of extension workers, guiding the farmers, because we don't expect the farmers to return to school. Agriculture is dynamic. So the state government ought to facilitate the requisite knowledge, providing improved seedling, and using the Ministry of Agriculture and the other agencies to guarantee best agronomical practices. Because we've ignored this over the years. That is why what we have now. But in the recent For me, it's more of a probing question. When government talks about palliative, as they did 3 months ago, and people talk about release from National Reserve, the silos, the question I usually ask, where are they? What happens is that government releases money to contractors who go mop up what the farmers have stored, waiting for season, which they need to upload in January, February.
In other words, there are no dedicated silos, really.
I'm asking, I have not seen. If there, at least in the southeast, we have none. If you are going to Abakaliki, you would have seen one at Ezilo. I mean the structure, but it's not been functional. If there are silos, for instance, this is a simple analogy. If it's true, government has silos and had released grain, what you would have had is price crash, particularly when it comes to cereal. But to have scarcity of rice now means that what government did was to buy up what was available. Once you have supply to the extent, even if you have shared to constituents politically, even if politicians have shared to their constituents or those who are loyal to them, they won't go to market to buy what they already have in stock. In fact, the experience of Christmas would have been such that farmers would have had gluts that they wouldn't be able to sell. I'm from Oboka. I can tell you that a bushel of rice now is almost 30,000. And a bushel is not 25 kg. I mean, rice now, 50 kg in Enugu is almost 70,000, between 65 to 70. You also look at the role of middlemen, because I just had people who came and did some job for me at the factory from Kano. They were shocked that even the cost of fuel here is what it is. In Kano, they said it's between 600 to 650. That morning, I think I bought 800. Cement in Kano has not exceeded 8,000, but here we know it's above 10,000.
So what is responsible?
No, the role of, I made the point that when you remove people from what they used to do, they begin to look for other things. And the easiest thing in the informal sector is renting, which includes playing the middleman role. If you apply it to, you are just here. I'm sure if you talk about trying to rent any property in Enugu, you'll be shocked. The rigors you will go through, trying to even meet who is supposed to be the landlord. You will see a line of agents with commissions and what have you. It's happening in agriculture, and you discover there is a cartel. Farmers can't just bring in their wares and sell in open market. You must pass through certain...
Is the government aware of this bottleneck?
No, the government is aware, because even the governments tend to encourage what they call through the patronage system, those they want to pay for their political role in elections and what have you. At times you hear that certain routes have been contracted out and people are there collecting fees and what have you. So
well, Comrade, I think I can assure you that we're going to do an entire program on these bottlenecks that's impeding successful agriculture and provision of food in our country. But let's go back to the reason why we invited you, which is the back and forth between labor and government, especially as government says they want to implement the Orasoye report, which of course was in the cooler for more than 14 years. And I want you to speak directly to the issue that has been a point of disagreement between government and labor, job losses if this happens. From what you know about the report, is it something that will make workers lose their jobs?
Well, you know what
Is their fear justified?
It ought to be justified in principle. But if you also take into context that the Orinsaya report was, Orinsaya committee was 2012.
Yes.
And attempts by previous governments to want to implement aspects. I think what we needed to do now is to find out what is it government at this point is implementing. And I think the proper phrasing ought to be implementing the white paper on a Orinsaya report, because I'm aware that the report was not entirely accepted by government.
There had been a white paper.
Yeah. So it is the white paper that will be able to speak to the fears, which normally, once you are talking about implementation of reports that has to do with scrapping up agencies, there will be job losses. And if you recall in the reports, part of what was amazing, sadly, was that in that report, the committee discovered we had about 53 or thereabout agencies that were funded through the budgetary processes but had no enabling acts. So in law, the question would be, how could an agency come into existence and even be drawing from the treasury, which is budget provision, when there is no act establishing it? That is one aspect. Now, if you say the agency operated illegally, what happens to the actions that it has consummated, which could include over time, one of which is disemployment of, because now you are dealing with contractual legal issues. It's not just about labor. It's about the right of somebody who have gained employment genuinely, because it is not his business. Once government is in situ, you believe that all the needful things have been done. That is one aspect. I was in Abuja, and I'm aware that parts of the implementation approved in the last federal ESCO talked about merger. So if it's about merging certain agencies, I do not see strict loss of job there. But I'm not even looking at the fears of labor. I am looking at whether, if you look at the public service, the way it is constituted, do we have enough manpower? The government will always talk about retrenchment. If you look at bureaucracy, the way in the United States, for instance, as at the time of the Obama government setting up the home security after the 9/11, America had over 30 million public servants cutting across all the agencies of government. In Britain, you have over 3 million, minus about 2 million that has to do with direct laborers. So the question we ought to ask, guided by Chapter 2 of the Constitution, as the stipulations, the mandate the government is expected to perform, which is the directive activities of government. That aspect talked about that every action of government must derive there. And if you look at Section 16, the economic objective, the question will be, is government running with sufficient agencies to provide the stipulation of those provisions of the Constitution, such that you can now begin to talk about those that ought not to operate? Part of what Orinsaya report also hinted when it was published or when it was presented to government was that some of the agencies of government came into being as a result of inefficiencies of their existing, from where they came out. Take, for instance, the police. You know, the road safety came out from the police, the civil defense from the police. You can also look at some other agencies. Are we now saying that we already have saturation and that we are satisfied with what these agencies, which government in its wisdom discovered that, no, the police cannot be able to deal with this and started creating it? Do we now believe that they are already meeting the mandate? But let me also make this point, which the report also highlighted. We can move back, because when we talk about the Orinsaya report, it's not even as if it's original. The report that tried to highlight the challenges of the public service, we can move to 1973, the Udoji report. But you will discover that what has happened from even 1920, the Rice report, up to Gorsuch, we've had over, if you add the Orinsaya report, you will have over 13 of reforms, committees, and what have you. What has happened, if you look at the Udoji report, which was very fundamental, was that there were aspects of the report government never even talked about, which has to do with the structure and training. But the Udoji report is, is remembered today for Georgia Award.
And the retrenchment.
On the retrenchment, which has to do with just adjustments, showing at that point that public servants were not earning enough to keep faith.
Let me take you over something you said, but whether government is sure that there's more than enough manpower for what they want to do. You suggested something like that. And I'm saying that the challenge here in Nigeria is that even the manpower produces less than what they're supposed to produce. People go to the offices and be sleeping. Some don't come to work at all. Some people have offices 6 months, they've not shown up, and they're taking salary from government. So yes, we have these people, but they're not even given what they have to give to sustain the bureaucracy of government.
I think you are
Is that not a problem?
No, it's
a big problem.
No, it's a problem because we've looked at public administration from the point of output. In 1945, when Professor Reed and co tried, there was a proposal to see whether the Marshall Plan, Marshall Plan, could be applied for the challenges in African countries. It was very clear that what Africa needed was development administration, not public administration. They needed to develop
Can you break it down for us?
No, that's what I'm trying to do. They needed to develop the requisite scale that ought to provide public administration. For instance, when you talk about salary, just the fine point you raised now, all you hear is about recurrence. And it is just like GDP, you match it. But the question is, how much of that is going into training? Sorry, I'm bringing this contest into play. I was here a few minutes ago, and there's this internal discussion on your scheme in terms of who does what. In 2 minutes, I've picked something. This is something you pay a consultant to provide workshop on whether a producer should lead or whether, I don't know if you get me. So in an office where you expect somebody to produce, mind you that the public service is contracts of service, different from contracts for service. The contract for service is like you pay a plumber who already comes with a scale, or you go see a doctor who already has a scale in his private, or somebody contracts you, Signature TV, he already knows you have the scale, you are coming to cover an event and what have you. That is not how the public service is structured. this hybrid service, this contract of service, you are expected to be trained because it is futuristic. It's not as if all the tasks and challenges are laid out.
The lack of training does not translate to people not coming to work. People come to work and sell wares.
I'm not justifying that. I'm saying that an idle mind tends to embrace whatever.
Because
in this office, nobody can come here to sleep, or nobody can come here to sell wares.
You know why I'm saying this is that when I go abroad, if you see an attendant in a restaurant, she's paid by the hour, and she gives the best of that hour. If you go to offices in the United States, in Britain and everywhere, everybody's up and running. But in Nigeria, you come and you're on somebody's desk and the person will be on the phone for 10 minutes and not paying attention. Is it just lack of training or lack of patriotism?
No, it is a culture. And let me at this point make this point. You know, when you talk about, well, first of all, let's use the America. If you look at the American work ethic, it came as a result of the Protestant ethic. The Protestant ethic developed, which was analyzed by Max Weber, talked about integrity, hard work, thrift, and being able to manage what you have. That culture is represented by the Republicans in America. That is why the Republicans are not giving to welfare. They look at welfare as supporting those who are lazy. But that is not even the fine point about the culture you made. America, before the killing of President Garfield by a disgruntled job seeker, was practicing the patronage system, similar to what we have here. It was after Macaulay introduced in India the merit system, which Britain borrowed a year later. That was 1883, that UK now introduced the merit system. Mind you, that the UK bureaucracy was based on elitism, aristocracy, and what have you. You need to come from somewhere to even be employed in the public service. America came into it in 1893, much later. So if you look at the merit system of the public service, it didn't even start either in UK or in America. It started in India. And that is why the Indian culture in bureaucracy, you discover it comes with entrepreneurial spirit. Because the point you made about hourly payment is because it is now justified that you have to earn
what you're paid.
What you are work. You have to work to earn. And an agency now, if they don't need you for 3 hours, don't have to keep you beyond that 3 hours. So the point I'm making is that we still practice the patronage system. Part of what Udoji discovered in his report is that traditional components seems to be dominant in the civil service of Nigeria in terms of favoritism, in terms of who recommends you and what have you. And that was part of what Maritala, though it was a very surgical approach that didn't use, the reform or retrenchment of 1975 that tried to throw away the bad water and the baby. So the point I'm making is that the public, even the Orange Saya report we are talking about, before that, has under Obasanjo, did we not try monetization? Where almost the junior cadre was fizzled out, where officers now had to be paid for their drivers, for, government no longer rent accommodation, and what has changed? What savings did government make from that?
Let's go back and talk about how government and labor can synergize to make the best of the implementation of the report, the original report. How can they work together?
Well, I do not think the government, you see, the role of labor is not to want to take over the role of government. Part of what we have also missed is that in Nigeria, there is this confusion.
The labor can be an obstruction.
No, I know. There is this confusion as to what government represents. Because when you are talking about the Urinsaya report, you are talking about federal public servants. You are not talking about the entirety of government in Nigeria, which means at that point, government is treated as an employer. That is just the point. You also see the same thing in wage system, where, for instance, minimum wage in Nigeria have been converted to mean salary adjustments as envisaged in the Constitution. No. Minimum wage is a wage set for employers of certain category. The minimum which any employer within that category ought not to go down, which is level 1, step 1. But you discover we have converted it to mean wage adjustment, that each time it comes, it's used to adjust wages up to the point of even permanent secretaries. It's an aberration. It is not a standard. It's not seen anywhere in the world. If you also take the role of the Ministry of Labor, the Ministry of Labor ought to be an umpire. And that is why when he plays that role in the private sector, he plays it efficiently. But in the public sector, the Ministry of Labor now assumed to represent an employer, that is the federal government.
And become biased.
That's the point. So the point I'm making is that when I was in the system, I remember this encounter. That was when Edeh was governor. And they said they were going to retrench workers. It was difficult for me, but I was able to get my people to buy into it. I said, I'm not going to oppose retrenchment because that is the exclusive right of the employer. But that what we will ensue is that the man must meet the condition for the retrenchment. And when we sat down and analyzed the law and computed what he needed to pay in order to retrench, because it has to be first in, last out, last in, first out. The man discovered that he needed the allocation for about 3-4 months. And that was how that matter ended. If I'm in the system today, I will not oppose retrenchment. Because with what is happening, if you get the government to pay the people their full entitlements, any worker that cannot start another meaningful life. Because the truth of the matter is that if you have done 50 years, you know at 60 you exist, or you have done 30 years, you know at 35 you exist, you will discover that the difference, which is less than 30% of your salary, is what you still spend transporting yourself. So why not take what you are entitled to and draw that as your pension? I don't know. So at times you discover that lack of information and the fact that we're always instinctive and emotive, we want to play to the gallery. People don't get the communication. After all, do people not voluntarily retire? I retired in 2011 after I lost the seat of NLC because I didn't see how, after being president of Civil Service Union, to come to Enugu and fit into grade level 14 job. And today I'm happier for it. So what I mean is that we must communicate to the workers' option. I remembered an incident under Mike Toure, that was under the military. It has to do with Daily Star. When we confronted government, I said, no, it's your right to want to retrench, but these are the conditions.
For you to retrench?
Exactly. By the time we came out, governments also gave an option for those who want to transfer to Ministry of Information and those who wanted to leave. And I remember then that we will always insist that government must fund parastatal to the extent of paying salary. So this thing is that labor leaders must also attune themselves to ILO standards. I'm not a labor leader that will, if I come here and say, no, you don't have the right to lock this place. But if you are the employer that decides that the workers will not run, mind you that if you are the one that have closed here, their salary will be running because you didn't provide job for them.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So we all need to do some work, especially the labor leaders.
Exactly.
And that's the point where I would like to thank you for your time.
Thank you.
The program continues. I've been speaking with Comrade Fidelis Edeh, former president of the Nigerian Civil Service Union. And the title I like so much now is that he's a farmer. Thank you for coming.
My honor. Yeah.
Don't go away. The program continues in a moment.